I'm your host, Aileen Peterson, a traditional midwife, healer, herbalist, and Ancestral Earthskills guide providing holistic, full-spectrum, community-based support from cradle to grave. This podcast is about remembering ancestral wisdom for healing and whole-body well-being, reconnecting to earth-based lifeways through traditional skills and land connection, and reclaiming our sovereignty by rewilding our health, birth, and parenting. My work and these transmissions are spiritual, radical, and anarchist explorations of the depths of our primal nature and how to reconnect with our ancient lineages and birthright of wholeness, health, autonomy, and a magical wild life rooted in connection to land, spirit, and community. It is for those yearning for an older, deeper, wilder way to navigate the late-stage capitalist landscape of the Anthropocene age while supporting ourselves and our communities regeneratively within and beyond the systems we live in. We are decolonizing, revillaging, rematriating, remembering, and reclaiming together. This is for the folk remembering their wildness. Be sure to subscribe to our Substack and to the podcast on Apple Podcasts to get notified when new episodes are released and access to episode transcripts and additional resources. You can subscribe for free, but by joining our paid Substack tier for $5 a month, your financial contribution acts like a Patreon and helps us to create this content for you. You'll also get access to exclusive content not available anywhere else online, all archived Substack posts, and occasional freebies. A little note about language before we dive into today's episode. I am a queer woman who identifies with and uses both feminine and gender-neutral or non-binary language for myself, and I work with others who have various gender identities. The language that I use in this podcast is fluid, and I will go back and forth between utilizing gendered and non-gendered language, depending on the topic, source, and experience or experiencer. Please feel free to replace any gender-identifying terms with those that align more with yourself if needed when reading or listening to my publications. Today's episode is on choosing a birth attendant and approaching that process holistically. We'll be talking about the importance of trust, relationship, and autonomy for yourself and your provider, whether you choose to have one or not, as well as how to go about doing the deep emotional, mental, and intuitive work of deciding who is going to be in your birth space. I do not accept every client or birthing person who comes to me and may be interested in my services or birth support into my practice. And so too, I don't expect every person to think that I am the best fit for them and their needs. In fact, I know that my style of practice, care, and birth support is not for everyone. To believe so is both arrogant and goes against my practice philosophy of individualized care is best care. But I know that there are families out there where my work is the right fit for them, and they will find me. Part of my risk assessment for a potential client is how I feel about them and our ability to establish a relationship of trust, respect, and intuitive connecting during and after an interview. What I am looking for in a client relationship is mutual respect, trust, and autonomy for each of us. What I am looking for is someone who feels in alignment with me and my style of practice, and who I feel in alignment with as someone I am serving and holding space for. What I am looking for is someone willing and desiring to build a deep relationship of connection with me, especially if they want me to attend their birth in any capacity. What I am looking for is someone ready and willing to do the work, the inner work, the hard work, the scary work, to take responsibility for their choices and stand in their autonomy and personal power during our journey together. Most of my work with someone who wants me to attend their birth is done prenatally. I am of the belief, as are many others I have learned from, that the majority of complications that arise in labor and the postpartum arise from something prenatally, and thus can be potentially prevented through care and support and attention prenatally. This is why I put so much emphasis on preconception and prenatal diet and earth-based therapies and holistic support for the most natural, primal, healthiest functions of the birthing mammalian human body and nervous hormonal system especially. But also not knowing me, not having a relationship of mutual trust and respect with each other before I walk into that birth space puts you at risk. One of the key tenets of facilitating a hopefully complication and intervention-free, undisturbed birth process is a feeling of safety in the birthing person. And a stranger showing up in your birth is not safe. Even if you are quote-unquote comfortable with nudity around people you don't know, or theoretically think it'll be fine to have an unknown or barely known provider or birth witness in your birthing space, your subconscious knows. Your hindbrain and fight or flight system know that strangers are not inherently safe when we are vulnerable, such as when we are in deep labor, and your body will shut down the laboring process as soon as it feels unsafe. We see this time and again with people coming to the hospital in active labor, only for labor to stall or stop completely. We see this with higher interventions, poor birth outcomes, and unsatisfactory birth experiences when parents say they never have the same provider twice at their prenatal visits or never know who will be the one quote-unquote on call at the hospital when they go into labor. They often feel like they have to be on the defense, which stimulates adrenaline and fight or flight, because one provider might have encouraged their birth plan, whereas another may have gone against everything they wanted, and they don't know who they'll get in birth. This sense of safety in the birth space also applies to the attendant. If they don't know you, don't trust you as their client, they may be more hands-on than usual, or act prematurely, or be more likely to utilize interventions where it maybe wasn't needed if they are afraid that undesirable outcomes will result in legal action against them, either from you, the client, or from their licensing board, for example. This goes for doctors and hospitals as well. It is why they follow strict practice procedures and often fight you on your birth plan, because if they don't, i.e. by letting you labor without continuous fetal monitoring or in the shower or with antibiotics, and something untoward happens, they are at risk for liability or medical malpractice suits both at the client and the hospital or insurance level, because they went against the standards of practice set by their hospital and ultimately their insurance companies. Traditional home birth midwifery and autonomous birthkeeping are not meant to replicate the obstetric hospital system of operation. Part of the whole reason why people don't want hospital births is because they are seeking a safe feeling, deeply nourishing, supportive, and respectful relationship with the care provider they are trusting to come into their birth space and assist them, however they desire them to, during labor and the immediate postpartum, the time when they are the most energetically, physically, and emotionally vulnerable to harm and abuse. This type of care and support is, I believe, the main driving force that reduces the need of interventions and makes hospital birth safer for many birthing families compared to hospital birth. This is also why a boundary line for myself and my practice is how I support free birth families. I am happy to work with you extensively in the prenatal period to help you prepare for an autonomous natural birth and postpartum recovery period. I am overjoyed to be able to come in and support you traditionally and holistically in the postpartum after your unassisted birth or hospital birth. I am honored to work with you prenatally and then hold space for you as a birth-wise witness and support during your autonomous free birth. But I do not personally make myself available to those who are planning unassisted births who only want someone, quote unquote, on call in case something comes up in labor, or just, quote, come and check on mom and baby after the birth, if we have had no time together prenatally to build relationship and connection, or to establish a baseline knowledge of your and baby's health to know what is actually not normal for either of you in labor. I do not judge those midwives and birth keepers who are willing to do so, but it goes against my deeply held beliefs and experiences around this work that it makes me too uncomfortable, and thus I don't feel safe to do myself. And that's not to say I won't take late transfers into my care. I absolutely will, but I will spend a considerable amount of time in the time we do have left together before you go into labor to establish that relationship and build trust and connection between you, your baby, and me. So you're probably asking, how do you choose a provider, birth keeper, or even a doula who will hopefully be a good fit and support your desired birth experience? Here are my recommendations. Number 1, you have to do the deep work. Really sit down and consider what it is you really want in a provider, which is rooted in what you ultimately hope to experience in birth. How do you picture your perfect, ideal birth unfolding? Can the provider or providers you are considering facilitate what you are envisioning? Here is sort of a twofold process. Consider if you are provider shopping based on finances or fears, or what you think you have to choose because of legalities or your partner or other family member worries, etc. Then dive deeper. What are you actually looking for in birth? Do you want a medicalized birth or a non-medicalized birth? A more hands-on or hands-off provider? And what does that mean for you and for them? Do you prefer a licensed provider with access to pharmaceuticals and insurance coverage? Or are you open to an unlicensed birth attendant who holds space for you to give birth on your own terms? Or something in between? Do you want a provider to take control and do everything in labor for you? Or do you want to be supported by your provider in your own autonomy and power and choices? Do you understand the restrictions and freedoms that licensed versus unlicensed birth attendants might have in regards to holding space for your birth? I.e., depending on your state laws, an unlicensed midwife may be able to attend breech or VBAC but not carry medications, whereas a licensed midwife might be able to carry medications but not attend breech, VBAC, or multiples. Number 2 is the research phase. What types of providers are in your area? Licensed midwives, unlicensed CPMs, and traditional midwives, birth keepers. What are their practice styles and capabilities, availability, etc.? When you read their writings, look over their website or social media, and so on, how does it make you feel? Good and excited? Nervous and apprehensive or unsure? Neutral? What is triggering those feelings for you? Is it their philosophy, their practice restrictions, such as whether having to answer to licensure regulations or being unable to attend, perform, or carry certain types of births, medications, technology, etc.? Or maybe their education background or level of experience, which may or may not be important to you. Number 3 is the interview phase. When you finally interview a provider or other birth attendant, how do you feel in their presence? How do you respond in your body or energetically when they speak? How do they respond when you speak? Do they seem to dance around your questions or answer them happily to the best of their ability? Does it seem like they're being honest with you? How do their answers to your questions resonate? Is what they're describing or telling you eliciting a feeling of comfort and reassurance, or anxiety and fear? Do you like their vibe, their energy, their presence? How do you feel instinctively about their practice policies, their education or experience background, how they hold space for birth, etc.? Do you feel like you could like them, trust them, build relationship with them, and have them in your most intimate, wild space and experience? Be wary of anyone who pushes their own practice over others' practice, or talks down on other providers and practices in the area that you could also choose to work with. Be wary of anyone who avoids your questions or won't answer them fully, and of anyone who makes you feel triggered, unsure, or unsettled after being in their presence. Trust your instincts. Number 4 is the decision phase. After you've had an interview, take a few days to really feel into all of these sensations, feelings, and thoughts that come up for you. Are they a good fit for what you're wanting and hoping for in your pregnancy and birth? Did they maybe open your awareness to alternate options or types of care you weren't aware of, or of new things to research or consider? How would it feel to have their presence and support if you have a perfect, easy birth and also a hard or complicated birth? Follow any thread that feels like a yes in your body. If anything makes you still feel apprehensive, explore why. Follow up with them if you need more clarification or reassurance, and then reassess. If it still feels like unsure or nervous energy in your body at the thought of them attending your birth, or like a firm no, they're likely not a good fit for you and your birth, whatever the reason. Again, trust your instincts. Consider interviewing multiple providers and types of providers before choosing one or any to hire. Lastly, a note about finances. Unfortunately, we live in a capitalist society where we depend on money to survive and meet our basic needs of food, housing, etc. We also live in a time of great economic uncertainty and financial insecurity for hundreds of thousands of individuals and families. Many cannot afford to pay for home birth services if they don't accept insurance, and not every provider is able to accept insurance. And even then, in many instances, you must still pay out of pocket and then file for reimbursement later. Others require you to pay in full by a certain time in pregnancy, which is particularly difficult to navigate if you are a late transfer. All of this is especially impactful and restrictive for low-income families who are also often the most at risk of experiencing obstetric violence and poor or unsatisfactory birth outcomes in the hospital system. Whereas I believe we shouldn't make choices as important as where and with whom, if anyone, you give birth based on finances, I also understand the realities of our current society. Unfortunately, I have been seeing an unsettling trend of more and more families choosing free birth or unassisted birth, not because they believe it is what is best for them and their families and the birth they desire, but because they don't have the financial ability to hire a midwife who they would ultimately prefer to have. This, to me, is a recipe for disaster and is also fueling an uptick in potential free birth families requesting quote-unquote on-call midwives just for the births without putting in the work of building relationship and trust prenatally together or being able to financially compensate a midwife who may be risking their livelihood, not just monetarily, to be on-call for free birth families. There's not really a good fix for this, other than really exploring what all of your options are for care providers who can attend you. Licensed midwives charging $7,000 plus who accept insurance only with reimbursement after the fact is likely not your only option. Depending on your area, you may have unlicensed CPMs and traditional midwives, or birth keepers more in alignment with free birthing families, willing to work more with you to be able to access their services, as well as asking providers about sliding scale and payment plan options to help facilitate access to their care. I have always done that and have always been a proponent of that model of service pricing. I need to make money to feed my family and keep the lights on, but I have also been a young mother living in poverty, unable to have a midwife attend me simply because of finances. I went on to give birth in the hospital and experienced immense trauma from that experience. It's a hard place to be in, but it won't change unless we as a community push for change and alternate models of economic systems, community-funded care, and mutual aid. In closing, I hope that this episode has given you a lot to consider and chew on when deciding how and with whom you want to birth. To paraphrase the words of an unknown person, quote, "The greatest risk factor for birth is who you choose as a provider," end quote. This is one of the most important decisions you will make in your life, with lifelong consequences, both positive and negative, for both you and your baby. If you are in need of more personalized coaching on birth planning, autonomous birth preparation for any provider or location, or choosing a birth attendant, please reach out to schedule a consultation at bearwomanwisdom@pm.me or book today at bearwomanwisdom.com. Interested in working with me remotely or in person, prenatally, in birth, or in the postpartum? Reach out via email, social media, or at my website to schedule a free discovery call. Thank you for joining me for today's podcast episode. If you feel called to autonomous, traditional, and holistic support on your journey, please visit www.bearwomanwisdom.com to learn more about my full-spectrum reproductive and naturopathic wellness offerings, upcoming classes and workshops, both online and in person, online resources such as digital ebooks, and my herbal apothecary.